Every conqueror is first a child, and every child is shaped by forces he never chose. Before Alexander the Great marched to the ends of the known world, he was a slight blond boy in a household of two overpowering parents. The greatest philosopher of the age tutored him. 3 Greek words drove him. This is the story of how that boy was made. Made through omen and instruction, through a horse no one else could ride, through a father's murder, and an oracle's surrender. He would become the man who could not be resisted. But first he had to be forged by a fiery mother, a calculating father, and a fire inside him that no teacher could ever cool. In 338 BC, Philip of Macedon crushed the Greeks at the Battle of Chaeronea. That single victory made him hegemon, the war leader and commander-in-chief of a united Greek army, assembled for one purpose, to invade Persia. To understand the man who will inherit that ambition and surpass it, the story turns back 18 years to 356 BC. In that year, Philip's wife bore him a son. They named the boy Alexander after an ancestral name in the royal house. History will come to know him as Alexander the Great. But on the day of his birth, he was only an heir who was not yet guaranteed a throne. Tradition wrapped his birth in prophecy. On the very same day, far to the east in the Greek city of Ephesus on the coast of Asia Minor, a man set fire to the temple of Artemis. It was one of the wonders of the world. He burned it for a single reason, so that his own name will be remembered forever. Picture the image. A great temple in Asia blazing into the night sky. At the exact hour, a Macedonian prince drew his first breath. To those who told the story afterward, it seemed no accident. Fire in the east, and the birth of a boy who would one day carry fire and sword across that same Asia. Portent clung to Alexander from his very first day. Alexander grew up between two overpowering parents. His father Philip was a burly, powerful figure, a giant in physical achievement and in intellect alike. He stayed calm under pressure, yet he could rouse fierce devotion in the Macedonian soldiers he had spent his life training. He had done what many thought impossible. He united the quarrelsome Greeks behind a single leader. Philip was also a man of enormous appetite. He drank hard and lived hard with a great hunger for food and for sex. He took many lovers, both men and women. He married several wives and fathered many children. He embraced the earthy physical side of life and its intellectual side just as fully. He was, in every sense, a very large man. What Philip lacked in spiritual temperament, his third wife supplied in full. Her name was Olympias. Philip had met her at a religious festival on the island of Samothrace. She came from the northern Greeks of Epirus, and she carried a stranger world with her to the Macedonian capital at Pella, a world of snake handling, secret cults, and the worship of earth goddesses. Through his mother, Alexander breathed in beliefs foreign to ordinary Macedonian life. He grew up certain that spirits, demons, and gods were always near. Years later, he would begin to suspect that he himself might be one of them. That conviction traces straight back to Olympias, a woman Alexander held in awe for his entire life. Philip thought carefully about how to raise his son. He wanted a prince who could succeed him and found a dynasty to rule the Greeks, and perhaps Persia too. He meant to fulfill the dream of pan-Hellenist thinkers like Socrates, to drive into the Persian Empire and seize it for the Greeks. So he hired the best teachers alive. Alexander's body was placed in the hands of a kinsman of Olympias named Leonidas, a name that echoed the Spartan king who died at Thermopylae with his 300. This Leonidas drove the boy hard, and the boy was unpromising material. Slight, short, almost delicate, with short blonde hair and a beardless face he would keep all his life. Under Leonidas, he learned to hunt, wrestle, handle weapons, and endure hunger and thirst. A boy prince does not grow up alone. A small band of companions was gathered around Alexander, but he was so precocious that boys his own exact age could not keep up with him, so his companions were a little older, still of his generation, and soon his friends for life. Chief among them was a Macedonian named Hephaestion. Between the two grew a bond that was deep, intimate, and lifelong. Later, it became something more as Alexander handed Hephaestion sweeping responsibilities across his new empire. Alexander never forgot these friends. He made certain they rose as he rose, repaying the shared adventures of their childhood with the highest rewards a king could give. If Leonidas hardened the body, another man was brought in to sharpen the mind. For his formal education, Alexander was placed under Aristotle, son of a former physician at the Macedonian court. Aristotle was studying marine life in a lagoon on the island of Lesbos when the summons to Macedonia reached him. He had trained as a pupil of Plato at the academy in Athens, but he had broken from his master. Plato reached upward toward the intellect, toward pure and abstract ideas. Aristotle reached outward toward applied knowledge of the real world. The temple at Delphi carried two famous maxims: know thyself, that was Plato's spirit, and nothing to excess, that was Aristotle's, who saw the universe as a great cosmos held in balance, built from four elements: water, earth, air, and fire. That doctrine of balance hardly fit the pupil. Alexander seemed to be pure fire. It is hard to imagine two people less suited to each other: the calm, patient student of nature seeking harmony, and the boy who wanted only to reach the ends of the earth and do what no one had done. And yet Alexander stayed loyal in his own way. When he later invaded Asia, he carried scientists with him and shipped specimens back to his old teacher. By then, Aristotle had returned to Athens and founded a new school at the Lyceum. Bundles of exotic plants and strange creatures arrived from the east. Aristotle's own pupil Theophrastus, who wrote the first book on botany, could describe the mangrove swamps of the Indian Ocean because Alexander had sent word of the wonders he found. Three qualities set Alexander apart from nearly everyone who has ever lived. Each one has a Greek name. The first is enthusiasmos, enthusiasm. The word literally means having a god inside you, breathed full of divine force, so that you seize your passions with joy and a sense of the sacred. Alexander had enthusiasms for people, for books, and above all, for Homer's Iliad. He slept with a copy beneath his pillow, hoping the heroic spirit of Homer and of Achilles, with whom he identified himself, would seep into his own mind and soul. He adored Greek culture and he idolized Athens, though the city never once returned his love. This romantic fire made him, at his best, a joyful companion. The second quality was darker, and it too came from Achilles. The Greek word is menin, the very first word of the Iliad. It means wrath. Achilles was famous for his rages and his heroic sulks, brooding in his tent while the Greeks begged him to return, refusing because his honor had been slighted. Alexander shared that fury, whether he meant to or not. He was known for titanic rages, often fueled by the heavy drinking woven through Macedonian life. In such a mood, he could kill a friend at a banquet. His father was the opposite, always calculating, cool, weighing one thing against another, even quietly amused by the passions he stirred in other men. Alexander took everything personally. Nothing separated him from his father more sharply than that. The third quality was the one his own contemporaries marveled at most. The Greek word is pothos, yearning, longing. It was the endless hunger to see what lay beyond the next horizon, to possess what he did not yet have, to press past every limit and reach for what no one had ever attained. It was a longing no conquest could satisfy, because each horizon crossed only raised another behind it. Enthusiasm, wrath, and yearning, enthusiasmos, menin, and pothos, those three forces, braided together, defined this extraordinary prince, and nearly everything he would become flows out of these three words. We know this character mostly through other men's eyes because Alexander was lucky in his biographers. Many wrote about him. Most of those books are lost, some of them burned in the great fires at the Library of Alexandria, the city Alexander himself founded on the delta of the Nile, which grew into the greatest city of the Greek world. The loss robs us of first-hand accounts of his boyhood. But those vanished books were read by later writers, above all Plutarch, near the end of the 1st century AD. In his Life of Alexander, Plutarch paired famous Greeks with famous Romans and set Alexander beside Julius Caesar. Much as Americans later gathered tales of young George Washington in the early 19th century, Plutarch collected stories of Alexander's youth on the belief that a man is understood best through the boy he once was. One story captures the boy completely: his fire, his bond with his father, and his uncanny eye for the natural world. The Macedonians loved horses. Every year a great horse fair filled Pella, drawing dealers from across the Balkans and the northern Greece, and even from Asia with the prized Nisaean breed, all come to sell to the king and his nobles. Alexander was still in his early teens when a stallion named Bucephalas arrived. The name means ox head, perhaps from a white blaze on his face shaped like a horned ox, perhaps from a brand on his flank. A dealer offered him to Philip, but as the king came near, the horse reared and lashed out with its front hooves. Philip judged it a poor war horse, one that would throw itself onto enemy spears. He and his groom tried again and again to calm it, failed, and began to walk away. Then a boy's voice cut across the fair. "It was a shame," Alexander said aloud. "This was the finest horse there, and they were letting it go." The remark stung because it implied that Philip could not master a good animal. Father and the son were already often at odds. Philip could see that Alexander's nature took after his mother's, not his own, and the two clashed constantly. So Philip turned to teach the boy a lesson. Did he think he could do better? With this horse, Alexander answered, he could. The whole crowd gathered to watch. The stallion was priced at several talents, and a single talent was 60 pounds of silver or gold, an enormous fortune. Alexander proposed a wager. If he rode the horse, his father would pay the price. If he failed, he would pay it himself. Philip agreed, half hoping the boy was serious. Alexander had seen what everyone else had missed. Bucephalas was terrified of his own shadow. The grooms had kept him facing away from the sun, so his shadow fell in front of him, and every flicker of it sent him rearing. Alexander waved the grooms away. The horse seemed to hate their hands and quietly took the reins. He turned the stallion's head straight into the sun, and the shadow vanished. He walked him forward, then broke into a run, and just before the horse hit full speed, the slight boy vaulted onto its towering back. The crowd braced to see him thrown. Instead, he brought the animal fully under control, urged it to a gallop, and rode back as if on parade. He swung down before his father. Philip wept and embraced him and said, "My son, my son." For one moment, the two were entirely one. Plutarch thought this the scene that revealed the man. Alexander never let that horse go. Bucephalas became one of his great loves and carried him on every campaign to come. Even when the stallion grew too old for battle, Alexander would ride him in the parade up to the front line, then move to a younger mount for the fighting itself. But the boy who could tame a stallion would soon command men. Alexander was just 18 when the armies met at Chaeronea. Philip handed his son the crucial post, the left wing of the Macedonian line, facing the finest Greek hoplites on the enemy's right. It put the young prince in command of the cavalry at the decisive edge of the battlefield. His father was about to test everything the boy had learned. To see what Alexander did that day, first picture the weapon his father had built. Philip had forged a new kind of army. He kept the old idea of the phalanx, but he armed his professional, full-time soldiers with pikes of astonishing length, shafts perhaps 18 feet long, tipped with small iron points made to punch straight through armor. These were no longer ordinary hoplites. Ranks of them, sometimes 10 deep, leveled their spears forward into a bristling wall of iron. That block was the heart of the formation, pinning the enemy in place. On the wings rode the cavalry, backed by a corps of shield-bearers, and here was the killing stroke. The cavalry would break from the wing, smash into the enemy's flank, and drive them onto the wall of pike points, a hammer crushing them against an anvil. Alexander's job was to break from the wing, swing wide, and strike the Greeks on their right side. There was a reason the right side was deadly. In a hoplite phalanx, every man carried his shield on his left arm, covering the man beside him, which left the very last soldier on the far right with no one to shield him at all. That weakness had haunted Greek warfare for generations. At the Battle of Cunassa, on the plains near the Euphrates, the Greek mercenaries of Xenophon's 10,000, fighting for the Persian prince Cyrus, refused to pull back from the river, because moving would expose those unguarded men on their right. At Chaeronea, Alexander drove his cavalry straight into that exposed flank. The Greek line buckled, then broke into chaos, and Philip won an overwhelming victory. That night, victory turned ugly. Philip, drinking hard as always, got drunk and led a staggering chain dance through the camp, past the pens where the Greek prisoners were held. Ivy wreathed his head. He sang and reveled, playing the part of Bacchus or some leering satyr. Then one of the captives called out to him. "King," he said, "nature cast you to play Agamemnon, so why do you play Thersites? Thersites is the low, ugly, cowardly figure of the Iliad, the man who mocked his betters, everything a hero is not." The insult cut through the wine. Philip sobered on the spot. He had the prisoner brought out, clothed, fed, and treated with honor, and he shook off his half-barbaric revelry as if waking from a dream. Philip and Alexander then went down to the Isthmus, where Philip had himself proclaimed hegemon, supreme commander of the Greeks, for the great war against Asia. Only one people refused. The Spartans would not surrender their independent foreign policy, and they would not accept Macedon as their master. For centuries, Sparta had seen the leadership of Greece as hers by right. Back in the great year 480 BC, when Xerxes of Persia invaded, the Spartans had fought both to throw out the invader and to guard their own primacy, and they would not now hand that primacy to a Macedonian. Their strongholds lay deep in the mountains, and Philip decided a war against them was not worth the cost. He turned and went home, but Spartan defiance would shadow Alexander for years to come. Triumph abroad did nothing to quiet the war inside Philip's own house. In his usual exuberance, Philip took yet another wife, a young woman named Cleopatra, of pure and noble Macedonian blood, and that bloodline was the problem. Alexander himself was of mixed origin, his mother an Epirus Greek, his father a Macedonian. At the wedding feast, as the wine flowed, the bride's father rose to toast the marriage, and he voiced a hope that this union would at last produce a true-born Macedonian heir to the throne. Alexander, sitting close by, heard it as a knife aimed straight at him. From his mother he had inherited a gnawing fear that he might not, in the end, inherit his father's crown at all. That fear was not irrational. Among many peoples of Indo-European descent, the Macedonians included, the royal house supplied the line of kings, but it was the warriors who elected which member of that house would actually take the throne. Even as the firstborn son, Alexander had no guarantee of anything, so the toast enraged him. He hurled his heavy drinking cup at the bride's father and struck him. Philip surged to his feet, drew his sword, and lunged to cut down his own son, and then, drunk, tripped over a low table and crashed onto his face in front of everyone. Alexander looked down at him with pure contempt. Then he walked out. not just out of the feast, but out of Macedon itself, riding west into the wild Balkans to put as much distance as he could between himself and his father. In time, Alexander was called back because Philip was finally ready to launch his invasion of Asia. He had already sent 2 generals, Parmenio and Attalus, across the Hellespont into Asia Minor to soften the resistance and clear the way. Now Philip wanted the world to see him reconciled with his son, and to have the young man at his side. At 20 years old, in 336 BC, Alexander was to stay behind as regent while his father marched off to conquer Persia. So father and son walked together into the great theater at Aegae, perhaps the very stage where the playwright Euripides had first performed his masterpiece, the Bacchae, in which a king is torn to pieces by frenzied women maddened by the god Dionysus. It was an ominous play for a king to sit beneath. The occasion was another royal wedding, not Philip's own this time. Philip walked in wearing no armor at all, only a plain white robe, wanting the assembled foreign guests to see a king who ruled by love, not fear. But love had made an enemy. One of his own bodyguards, a man named Pausanias, had once been close to Philip, then cast aside, and had nursed the wound for years. Seeing the king walk out exposed and unguarded, Pausanias rushed forward, drove in a blade, and killed him on the spot. Philip fell dead in the dust of the theater. Pausanias ran for a horse waiting at the edge of the ground, but he tripped on a root, went down, and the other guards were upon him in an instant, and killed him where he lay. No one ever discovered who was truly behind the murder. Plenty claimed the credit, and plenty fell under suspicion. Some pointed to the Athenians, who may well have had a hand in it. Others whispered that Alexander himself and his mother Olympias had set the killing in motion. And far away in Susa, the great king of Persia boasted that it was he who had guided the assassin's hand, his revenge for Philip's insolent threat to invade the Persian Empire. 3 shadows, and no certainty behind any of them. The one certain thing was who gained the most. In a single stroke, a bodyguard's blade had emptied the throne of Macedon and left it waiting for a son. In an instant, the regent became the king. Alexander stepped forward at once, seized control of Macedon, cut down every rival claimant to the throne, and made himself its master, inheriting both his father's realm and his father's mission to conquer Asia. But the crown was not yet secure. It took him 2 full years to lock down his power at home, and then to march back into Greece, where the cities had assumed that with the strong man dead, they were free to go their own way. Alexander shattered that hope. He summoned the Greeks once more to the Isthmus and had himself recognized as their supreme commander in exactly the office his father had held before him. While he was in Greece, Alexander went to consult the oracle at Delphi, high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. Delphi had opened this whole larger story more than 2 centuries before, back in the 540s BC, when Croesus of Lydia, dreading the rising Persians, sent envoys there for advice. Now Alexander was moving the other way, out of Greece and toward Asia, and he wanted the oracle's guidance and the god's blessing. But he arrived in early winter around November, and the oracle was closed. She did not prophesy in the cold season when Apollo was set to depart and his darker half-brother Dionysus took his place. Alexander, in one of his rages, seized the priestess and began shoving her toward the crypt below. She turned to him and said, "Boy, there is no resisting you." At once he let her go. "That," he declared, "is oracle enough for me," for those were exactly the words he had come to hear. He left the priestess there, went home, gathered his army, and turned it towards the Hellespont. And everything that had made him now marched behind a single purpose, the fire of his mother, the cold calculation of his father, the iron discipline of Leonidas and the balance of Aristotle, enthusiasmos, menin, and pothos, enthusiasm, wrath, and yearning, and the horse whose wild spirit had always matched his own. Behind him lay Greece, subdued and uneasy under his hand. Before him lay Asia and the boundless horizon he had ached his whole life to cross. The boy was finished. The conqueror was about to begin.